Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, December 18th meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. Can we have roll call, please?
Thank you. Commissioner Garpetian?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian is absent. Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you for presence.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, December 15th, 2014, on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Can we have approval of the minutes? Do we have any revisions?
No.
So moved.
I second.
We have roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Thank you. Vote 4-0. Thank you. Approved.
We will now have oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. We have one card, and that's from Sean Bursell.
Good evening, commissioners. First, let me wish you a very happy holidays and a prosperous new year. I wanted to let you know that the Doctor's House Museum will be open for candlelight tours this coming Saturday from 6:30 to 8:30. The house is all decorated up in a Victorian motif, and there are self-guided tours, as I say, from 6:30 to 8:30 through the museum, which is located in Brand Park at 1601 West Mountain here in Glendale. The house is as the commissioners know, was built in approximately 1890, and it is a classic Queen Anne Victorian house, and as I say, it's beautifully decorated for the holidays. So we invite the community to come out this Saturday, the 20th, between 6:30 and 8:30, and take the self-guided tours of the house. We also will have some cookies and coffee and hot chocolate, and there'll be a group from the Pasadena Conservancy of Music, young people who will be providing appropriate holiday music. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no more cards. Then we'll go to comments from the commissioners.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment on a workshop from the sponsored by the LA Conservancy that I attended back in October called Historic Neighborhoods. And it was focused on districting and the processes leading up to historic districting. A very interesting conference for the half day that I was there. The organizers gave out an interesting, I think somewhat useful questionnaire that's really directed at people who might be considering historic districting, which I handed out to the commissioners and to Mr. Platt, that involve how one begins the process of assessing their neighborhood and its worthiness as a historic area. So I share that with you, but just a few comments. One of the things that was mentioned by Ken Bernstein, who's the head of the city, head of preservation for Los Angeles, was that he and the members of the LA Conservancy don't feel that when you come down to evaluating changes and modifications in districts that there's really a situation of precedent setting. They were very interested in looking at each change that is made on a case-by-case basis, which was interesting to hear because we've debated that issue many times here. One of the other things was I went to a workshop on the old versus the new, or next to old, next to new, and several of the chairs of the historic district committees were moderating this meeting. They are self-governing, the historic districts or preservation overlay zones in LA, which is an interesting concept because the city's so huge that they really have to have some sense of self-governance because it's just too vast, I think, for the city to oversee. But I could also see some of the pitfalls in that you have to be very organized and know what you're doing and be consistent in your processes. And my sense of looking at this self-governance was that it may not work ideally for moderating and administering districts. So the system we have here seemed to be preferential, but the idea of having some sense of self-governance where there's at least a committee working locally to monitor the district and look at what's happening and consider what's going on in their area seemed to be a good idea and have some worth to it. So that was an interesting point. I did go to the Wilshire Park District and took a walking tour, and I have to say after seeing it that Glendale doesn't hold second candle to anybody. We have some of the greatest districts in terms of continuity and intactness and beauty of anywhere. So I came out of that being impressed by the district, but also very proud of Glendale's historic districts. So that was basically it, and those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Vidor.
Okay.
How many?
You don't have any? Okay. Yes, I just wanted to share with my fellow commissioners that I attended a couple of the Raising the Bar events that Glendale Historical Society hosts every month or so. It's a great place to get to know other residents and how much they care about our neighborhoods. Also, for people who know me and people who don't know me, I used to live up in Northern California, Marin County, for 14 years. So every so often I go up there back and visit. We didn't have a historical society there. So last weekend, I was up there in San Francisco, and there are a few spots, my favorite spots, that I have to go and visit every time. So I went back to Marin County, and I see this big sign that says Kentfield Green Bray Historical Society. So I had to walk in and talk to the people there. There are two elderly ladies that care about the neighborhood. I mean, I haven't seen it like that at all. So I took a picture with them, and I shared our history in Glendale and the historic districts that we have. And they started about a year and a half ago. And it was very encouraging to see that they started that. And, there's an old saying, they say, wherever you go, the sky is the same color. And wherever you go, you can find people who care about their neighborhoods and trying to preserve it. So I wanted to share that with you. It was very encouraging to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No. I would just like to thank the Glendale Historical Society for putting on a wonderful holiday party at Brand Library. And across town and up the hill, the Montrose had their delightful Christmas parade with a presentation by the Friends of Rockhaven, which is called A Movable Feast. And if you didn't see it, it was very interesting. It's this thing which kind of looked like a combination of a Model A Ford and a wooden table propelled by bicycle chains and everyone pedaling furiously while eating a holiday dinner under a gas-lit chandelier. It had to be seen to be believed. But on a personal level, I would like to thank the Planning Commission for the card that I received today. And it's very nice. And the fact that they've gone through the effort for everyone to sign it, I think it's a very great thing. And the Planning Commission has been so helpful to all of us all year long, and I'd just like to thank them very much.
I second that.
Planning Division likes you guys.
And then we'll continue. Any old business?
No old business.
So we'll go to new business, which is for 201 North Broadway. Glendale Register number 38, design review of proposed facade remodel.
Okay, and I've got a quick presentation for this project. It's a building you're familiar with. You've reviewed it and voted on it in recent years. And everyone knows the building at the corner of Wilson and Brand. That's the former F.W. Woolworth's Five and Dime shop. So we wanted to start with some of these historic images to show what the building looked like before the second story was added, which was done with commission approval in 1998, 99, also with Historic Resources Group serving as the consultant. This building's had kind of a tough history. When the second floor was added, it was begun without review, although the building had been identified as a historic resource. Work was stopped. The commission got involved. HRG was retained. And the second floor the construction was allowed to continue, but with a redesign that was felt to be more appropriate to the style of the building. The building still has a lot of the features that you see in this photo, especially above the storefront level where we have the scored stucco that gives it its Art Moderne character. Some of those little crenellation pieces up at the top have been lost to create notches for the second floor windows, but the sense of the lower part of the building remains. More importantly, you can see that the original storefronts have been gone, and I'll show you the current photos, but the storefronts that you see here were removed in the 1998 renovation. New storefronts were installed, and then just a couple of years ago, the Commission reviewed a proposal to make some very minor alterations to some of the storefronts on Brand, and I'll mention that again. The important thing to see here is that the Wilson Avenue facade, which is on the left of the lower left-hand picture, has basically always had this kind of blank character that it has today. It's in this photo, you can't really tell, or in either of the photos that show that facade, it's hard to see if the scoring lines in the concrete wall or the stucco concrete wall are there or not. We're presuming that that's an original feature, but we really don't know. But those vents have been there for a long time, and it's always had this kind of blank character. Here is the building today with the second floor. You can see along this line here where the extent of the original one-story building was. All of the storefront infill, including the aluminum and glass storefronts and the granite base, were part of the 1998 approval. In the approval a couple of years ago, there were some alterations made to add a door to the center storefront. There was kind of a goofy gateway arch that was removed from the front entry. Importantly, the terrazzo flooring that says Woolworths was retained, and the current proposal will also retain that, so that's one of the nice links that we have to the building's heritage. What's happened was that the storefront renovations made by the previous owner never really took. They've had trouble retaining tenants. The Staples office supply place at the corner has gone out of business. The center storefront was never rented from the time of the previous work. The AT&T store has been there, and is it still there? It is still there. Okay. Here is the Wilson Avenue facade, so you can see this picture shows the little pyramid hat that was put on the corner element. The current proposal is seeking to remove that with staff support. It really doesn't fit the art moderne concept of the building, so we don't think that's going to be any great loss to get rid of it. And the important thing is the current proposal is trying to breathe new life into the building, bring some retail tenants in who are going to stick around and bring life to the street. Downtown has changed a lot, as you know, from the time this was approved previously. And with all of the new residential units and Wilson becoming a more major thoroughfare than it was before, we think it's appropriate to let this building be rehabilitated through introducing new storefronts on that blank facade. So here's a rendering of the proposal. Basically, all of the ground floor storefronts will be removed. The new storefronts will be installed with a black finish. They will match the previous commission-approved storefronts in terms of this kind of striped, modernish detailing at the top. New bases will be put under the storefronts. They'll be somewhat lower than the ones that were previously, the non-original storefront bases that are there now, which will be good to provide more transparency into the storefronts, which is in keeping with the DSP standards. At the corner entrance, these right now have some checkerboard patterns that was part of the 1999 approval. That's going to be removed so that the horizontal lines will just continuously wrap around the building. New storefronts, 6 new storefronts will be installed along Wilson. They'll be separated by piers, so they'll be evenly spaced, similar to the spacing along Brand. The bases will kind of rise from shorter bases at the higher elevation at the corner, and as the street kind of descends a little bit, the bases will rise. And then new awnings will be installed across in front of each of the storefronts, except at the corner. Staff supports the introduction of the storefronts. We've done a Secretary of the Interior's standards analysis for you in the staff report. We think this is kind of what rehabilitation is defined by, the ability to introduce new features in buildings so that they can actually function better in today's world. And if you want to look for precedent in commission approvals, you can think of the Masonic Temple, where the current window pattern on the north and south facades wasn't adequate for the new use that was proposed, and the commission approved significant changes to those facades to kind of let them live while keeping the historic features of the building. The current proposal is going to keep all of the extant historic features on the building, which are pretty much limited to, like I said, the terrazzo at the entry, and then the facade masonry at the upper floors that still retains some of the original Art Moderne character. The existing floor plan, which isn't actually quite the current floor plan, it misses the third storefront that was inserted. The new floor plan is similar to what's there right now, but you can see along the top edge here, this is the south facade on Wilson. At the upper, you see it's blank, and at the lower, we see that it's 6 new storefront bays, one of which will have an entry door into this retail space. The configuration will allow for further subdivision if it's warranted in the future, so this could have four stores. We don't know exactly how many storefronts or how many retail units will be in there right now, but it gives the owner flexibility. Here's the current condition and the proposed condition along Wilson. You don't see the horizontal lines in the storefronts. They're in the drawing, in the section drawing, and they're proposed. They're just hidden behind the awnings in this image. And here's the Brand Boulevard facade. We will do a sign program with the owner, which is a staff-level approval for any project that has over 2 storefronts or 2 retail units. The goal of the sign program is to allow signage to reflect the needs of businesses, so we don't regulate fonts and colors, but we do regulate size per the zoning code, as well as the type of sign that goes up so that we have a uniform sign type that's going to be attached to the building. You can also see in the proposal there's some planters that are proposed. We're recommending a condition that those be explored. We don't know if those are even allowed without an encroachment permit. If they are allowed, we're concerned if they don't have irrigation that we probably wouldn't want to see them because features like that have to be hand watered lead to death. So we'll be okay if those just are eliminated from the proposal. Proposal also calls for a number of gooseneck fixtures, including one up here at the corner that's kind of not doing much, and then fixtures on each of the piers at both facades of the building. We don't think gooseneck fixtures are appropriate to the Art Moderne style. I'm not sure that lights are necessary at this location. There's a lot of ambient light, but if the Commission is inclined to approve lights, we'd like them to be more in keeping with the Art Moderne style. And then the other big change is the new paint job, which overall we're supportive of. We think having kind of a dramatic paint job on this building is an interesting idea. There's some concern, and in the staff report I wrote my concern was more at the upper portion, but what I really meant was this band of black along here. But the same issue occurs at the top. Mm-hmm. We'll kind of eradicate the sense of some of the horizontal banding that's on the building, and you can see in this, here's some storefront details. And in this, you can see in this section that there's actually a slightly stepped profile to this band above the storefronts. And by painting that such a dark color, we'll kind of lose the shadow lines and the sense of that horizontality. So we're recommending that the project team consider it possibly a similarly dramatic paint scheme, but something that allows these features to have more visual presence from the street. We are also recommending that these awnings, which are rather rigid in their construction as proposed, be configured differently. What typically happens, if you look at the cursor here, is instead of having this kind of boxed out with a horizontal member, this member often will be a diagonal member that comes down, similar to the arm of a retractable awning. And that allows the skirt, this kind of valance lower portion, to kind of hang loose and kind of move in the breeze, and it gives the awning more of a traditional character. Going back to the historic photographs, you can see that the building did have very prominent awnings, and those are definitely the old-style retractable awnings that we don't see today, but the proposed awnings would kind of recall that, and I think they're appropriate, especially since they're just being attached into the new storefront area. They're not going to cover any of the historic detailing. We did an assessment under the Secretary of the Interior standards. Staff believes that the project meets the standards. The tricky part is the introduction of new storefronts in a facade that's been historically blank. It's hard for me to kind of look at that blank facade and say that's a character-defining feature of the building. It's probably a result of whatever interior configuration Woolworths had, where they needed to have less storefront, less glass, and they needed some wall space along that side. Since Woolworths is gone, there's no need for that to be maintained. So we felt, similarly to the Masonic Temple, that this kind of intervention is appropriate because it's going to breathe new life into the building. In the unusual situation that it would never, the storefronts would go away and we needed to restore that wall, it's simple materials. It's not anything that's handcrafted, so the wall could be easily replicated. So we felt that that met Standard 10, the reversibility factor, even though the original material would be lost. And we also think that Standards 2 and 5 are met because there's no historic material that's being impacted by the design. It's all recent infill. And then I added Standard 5 with a typo, several typos, sorry about that. But basically saying that the materials and finishes and features that characterize the historic aspect of the building are all being retained. So we recommend 7 conditions. I've mentioned several of them. We think the awnings should be altered, but we think presence of awnings is okay. We're asking that the tile cladding, and you have a material board in front of you with a proposal for subway tile. That module, the small subway tile, is much more like an interior finish. So we're hoping that we can find a module that's kind of more appropriate to the retail and street setting.
I'm sorry, where does that tile go again?
It goes on the base, under the storefronts, and then on the piers between the storefronts. So everything.
Because it shows.
Let me show you here. If you look at this image, up behind you, it's the bases and the piers running up between the storefronts.
Okay. When I looked at this design on my computer and
when you zoom in, yeah,
I zoomed out basically, or zoomed in to make it a little bit larger. It looked like a brick finish.
Yeah, it's what's called a herringbone pattern, where the tiles are kind of like diagonally. Right. And to staff's mind, that's a much different style feature. That would be an older storefront type feature if you were doing something like that. So we're recommending a stacked bond, where you have the vertical joints are lined up, and so each module is kind of a repeated stacking of the rectangle. And if you've looked at the new Central Pharmacy, where Zinke's Shoe Repair used to be, there's kind of a tile cladding that's probably too big for this, but it uses a stack module, and that's a little modern building, and I think it looks very appropriate to the style. So hopefully you can take the bonding pattern into consideration in your deliberation. We also we feel it's important that the tile wrap the corners of each pier and at the top of each storefront base, so that we don't have grout joints kind of running on the edges. Mm-hmm. Hopefully whatever tile's used will have some sort of tile that actually turns the corner, or we'll find a solution for that.
They have bullnose corners that they can put.
Yeah, they could have the bullnose, right? I already mentioned the lighting. If we do have lighting, it should complement the building style. Generally, the Commission doesn't focus on paint color on our properties, but in this case, because the black paint looks like it's actually going to make character-defining features of the building a little harder to appreciate from the street, we thought it was appropriate to bring that to your attention and see if we could come up with a better palette. We mentioned the planters, and then also the sign program, which will come to us at a later date, but will be part of our staff review. And that concludes the staff presentation.
We have one speaker. That's Sean Purcell.
Thank you, Chairman Morgan and members of the Commission. I'm Sean Purcell with the Glendale Historical Society. The Glendale Historical Society supports adaptive reuse of historic buildings in the appropriate circumstances. We understand that, particularly with commercial structures, what worked in decades past may not provide the functionality needed today. And as Mr. Platt mentioned, the Secretary of Interior standards allow for alterations of commercial buildings to maintain their commercial viability. While not addressing the specifics of the proposed alterations to 201 North Brand, TGHS does have concerns about the process being pursued here. As has been noted, this structure is on the Glendale Register of Historic Places, and it has been altered significantly previously. We are concerned that additional changes to 201 North Brand may significantly impact the remaining integrity of the building and its continued eligibility for the Glendale Register. Yet the staff report states that the project is exempt from CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And I would just point out, if this were not already on the Glendale Register and these changes were made, and this came to you as a nomination for the Glendale Register, you would look at that and say, wow, how much integrity of the historic building remains. And so we believe, since this project may alter a designated resource to the point that it is no longer eligible for designation under the Glendale Register, we believe that this project is not exempt from CEQA. Rather, the city must acknowledge and assess through a CEQA review the impacts of the proposed alterations. We therefore encourage the city to conduct a CEQA analysis prior to approving the proposed alterations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no more cards, so.
Oh, I'm sorry, the owner is
Oh.
here, and I forgot to tell him to submit a card, so you fill out a card when you're done. And you have a chance to rebut. You come up right now and speak. Sorry about that.
Good evening to the Commission and also to Mr. Platt, the Historical Preservation Committee. I don't do this often, so forgive me if I'm a little informal.
And your name, please?
My name is Gus Spoliansky, and I formed an entity that acquired the property at 201 North Brand recently. We've owned the property since October 31st, actually. We closed on Halloween. And, I'm very excited about this acquisition and, very excited about becoming a member of the community and having commercial property here. I would like to rebut the gentleman in a moment. I'm afraid I don't know the name of his organization or who he represents when he said we, if I could get
The
clarification.
Glendale Historical Society.
Oh, he's with the society?
Yes.
Okay, got that. Thank you very much. I didn't realize that. Anyhow, so thank you. Mr. Platt did a great job sharing presenting the changes that we hope to make, and the reason for those changes, the building has lacked vitality and I believe needs a breath of fresh air, and the proof of that is the fact that it's been underoccupied for years. The middle space, which I'm currently negotiating a lease with a company called Orange Theory, that may or may not happen there. And they've met with planning, and that's been going on actually from prior to my involvement with the property. The problem has been that the storefronts along Brand only have created a constraint where it's almost like having three bowling alleys. You have these three long, dark spaces, or one or two, depending on how it's configured. And that makes it difficult to lease the property because nobody really wants to be sandwiched between the corner space, which was the Staples, and AT&T. That space has sat vacant for 6 years. The upstairs space is a little awkward in that it's built, it was an afterthought, and it was part of a renovation that, as Mr. Platt mentioned, was done in 1998, and it was built into a bow truss ceiling, which has historical integrity and is actually a beautiful feature. But unfortunately, at that time, unfortunately for the bow truss ceiling, it was hidden by adding a second floor right at the string of the bow truss, and now those cords kind of awkwardly go through the upper floor, also making it a little bit difficult to find occupants for it. And the basement, because it's a basement and doesn't have any natural light, has also remained vacant intermittently. So the property's had some problems in terms of occupancy and use. So when I started to pursue this property when it became available, I immediately felt that by opening these storefronts on Wilson and giving ourselves optionality in terms of how the space is used, that the likelihood that the space would be utilized would increase. That, coupled with the fact that the new project on the corner of Brandon Wilson across the street going south and then going to the east divided by the alley, which has hundreds of apartments coming online and some commercial spaces which have also been leased, being immediately across the street from what is now a sheer wall, I thought that opening the wall would create synergies and really create vitality along Wilson going from the corner to down the street going, let me get my bearings. It would be
West.
Thank you, west. So that's what inspired me. And then in seeking your approval for the project, I did go into the archives and I sought images. And in fact, it was one of these older pictures that inspired the awnings. I don't know that the awnings are necessary in terms of a business decision, but I do think they make the property more beautiful and kind of help restore it to its original or move it more closely to its kind of like historic roots, which my goal certainly has been to work closely with the with Mr. Platt and try to understand exactly what those historical roots are and go through the archives, and I'm hoping that we accomplish that. As far as the staff report, I thought it was spot on. I really appreciate the way it was handled, and I find it to be constructive criticism quite sincerely that is helpful. For example, the color of the band. It hadn't occurred to me that might hide some of those details, but that is one of the few details that really does have its roots in the earlier version of the building prior to the 1998 remodel. And with all due respect, I don't mean to be critical, but I feel that the 1998 remodel didn't do this building any favors. And I think that what we're doing now, I think it does, and I hope that you'll see it that way as well. Then with regards to the checkered board pattern that we're removing, I spoke with some architects and consultants, and I am myself somebody who really appreciates architecture as a layperson, and as a real estate professional, I've had the good fortune and pleasure of working in the creative field of architecture, and it's one of my favorite aspects of my job. Quite frankly, it's a lot of fun. And so the streamlined Moderna elements of the building, I think, are quite lovely, and so I wanted to restore that by getting rid of the checkered board, because streamlined Moderna gives you images of a speeding bullet train, harken to that era, and you can think of the Superman show, and it's that movement, and I felt that the checkered board broke that up, so I wanted to pay attention to these types of details, and in hopes of creating something that's more worthy of a really well-traveled hard corner. I'm also new to Glendale, and quite frankly, have been really I hadn't spent a lot of time in Glendale, and it's incredible to me what's going on here. There's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of foot traffic, and it's really quite a wonderful and vibrant community. And I think this is a very well-traveled corner, so I think that opening these storefronts will probably create some great synergies. As far as, do you have any? Do I field questions now? I don't know the way this process works.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not totally sure I understand. I hear what you're saying about the Brand Boulevard storefronts, that they're difficult to inhabit as a business. And I'm not totally sure I understand, with the changes you're proposing, how these spaces are going to be optimized and what specifically is going to happen to make them more rentable.
Okay. Thank you. If you look at the bottom image there, the floor plan, for the proposed floor plan, can I walk over there?
Stay at the microphone.
I have to stay at the
I'll move the cursor.
Okay, if you put the cursor at the new storefront, where the steps are, right there, and then you follow that line from that pilaster down, this now becomes a rentable area that can be fronted on Wilson. So instead of, which means that AT&T, which is long and narrow and then goes into some load or public area, now you can have a unit that fronts Wilson, making the corner unit not have to be so deep, and then making space B, which fronts Wilson, more attractive, because renting, the reason I believe that space B, the space that Mr. Platt is showing right now, has been vacant for 6 years is because it's very difficult to lease the square footage behind that space. So because it's so long and narrow, it's hard to find a tenant that has a retail use that would find that space to be prototypical to their use.
Does the feedback that you're getting from tenants or from previous tenants indicate that that is the reason? Or, personally, I don't see Upper Brand Boulevard as being particularly vital in terms of inhabitability by businesses. I mean, we have a lot going on in the south end of town, but it doesn't seem to me like that's necessarily the reason why these spaces aren't habitable. So I'm just curious as to the conclusions.
Yeah, well, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I have, because there's a lot at stake here, and this is a significant undertaking that I'm taking very seriously. I've consulted with several real estate professionals whose job is to lease to retail spaces, and the feedback that I've gotten is that this makes the space far more leasable, and that the likelihood of occupying the building is increased dramatically through these improvements. I also have a good deal of experience in that area and am confident that it will work.
Could you talk a little bit about the entries to each of the new tenant spaces? It looks like each one is different in its style and approach, whether setback with angled, glass walls, straight across the storefront, setback on the corner, and then the southmost portion again is kind of inset again with right angled walls. Why are those? Why is there no consistency in that approach?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I'll do my best to answer it based on what I understand it to be. Currently, the AT&T storefront is existing. It was earlier. Mr. Platt asked if they were still there. They have an option to extend their lease another 5 years, which we just actually signed, and so they are extending their lease. The other space is vacant, and currently the storefront is further to the right there. Thank you. And that storefront actually leads into sort of a bunker that is part of the building. It's a load-bearing structure that was added when the second floor was added. It cannot be removed. And with that, right now you enter into that vestibule, if you will, with walls going up to the ceiling, and then you go left through another door to access the space that I'm referring to as Suite B. And the issue with that storefront being there is it would be an awkward entry. So what we're proposing is that we move the storefront further to the south, along where Mr. Platt is pointing now, because that way you can see the wall behind it actually right through the glass there. So that way you're to the left of that sheer wall that cannot be removed, and you have a better entry place. And it is in the lease proposal from the gentleman that I'm negotiating with currently to occupy that space that storefront be moved. Then the third storefront wouldn't be touched at all. It's the corner storefront that runs along, that is diagonal and occupies the corner. It was the original entry to the Woolworths, and there is where the terrazzo and the historical floor is. And then as you go down Wilson, it's not really predetermined exactly where the storefront will end up. That's a question of if somebody comes along and wants to lease, let's say, let me give an example. I'm sorry, I'm going to digress for a moment. For example, if the space that we're negotiating with now for Suite B, if that's for any reason falls apart and doesn't happen, somebody very well might come in and want to lease the entire ground floor, in which case then it'll just be a question of egress and ingress and making sure that we meet ADA standards and what have you.
I understand. Maybe I should just clarify. I'm less concerned with the location of them and more the design approach where they are all differing. They all intersect the storefront differently than
I think what we could ask Mr. Spoliansky is, you have the kind of splayed, recessed entry for AT&T. Could we turn that? Could we make that? And since you have a lease signed with them now, that's probably going to stay that way, and it's appropriate to the style. Could we say that this storefront for Space B, as well as the one on Wilson, be designed to match that, so that we have consistency at the non-corner storefronts?
I'm certainly open to that. The only constraint that I'm not sure that I can answer that, because there may be a constraint in that as you go down Wilson, it actually slopes downwards. So we're showing stairs to go in. You have to, in other words, the ground level gets higher as you go down Wilson, and so we'll need stairs. That would actually be an interesting way to handle those stairs, so it's probably quite feasible. But, without consulting my architect, I'm certainly happy to consider that if it pleases the committee.
Do you know the square footage of tenant B as it's shown in the drawing?
3,300 square feet. And we found in our research that that is more of a prototypical, desirable size for a, for a retail space. It's a little more difficult to get some of the bigger spaces. Now, I will say that I've had some inquiries to take the entire ground level, but it's in each of those letters of interest that I've received, and there are currently 2, they have wanted me to open facade on Wilson, even though it's not, it doesn't really, in other words, part of one, from an aesthetic standpoint, you let in more light, and people want that. But also from the standpoint of being able to reconfigure the space and have storefronts fronting Wilson, that need goes away if somebody takes the whole ground floor. It's not as important, but it still seems important to people to have that light coming in and to have the openings. They feel the space is more desirable that way, which I understand.
And then another question, what is your thoughts on staff's comments about removing the planters?
I'm fine with that. I do agree that without irrigation, they die. And I just thought the planters were a nice detail, and asked the architect to put them in there because I thought that would be attractive. And with regard to the lighting, I completely agree with staff's comments on the gooseneck lighting. And I was thinking that some really nice Art Moderne sconces would be a nice alternative, although I also agree that there's plenty of ambient light. I don't know that it makes, in other words, I don't really see an economic advantage to putting in the lighting. I just want to make the building as beautiful as possible, and hopefully, at least as I see beauty, which is completely subjective, and but I think that it will add to the appeal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I just have a few comments, I think. Let me see.
Thanks.
As far as the leasability of these spaces, many of the buildings on Brown Boulevard have the same issue. They're very narrow and very long, and the rear portion of it is being used for storage, and landlords cannot make any decent rent on it. Basically, over here on this big space, I just did a quick calculation. The existing one is about 10,000 square feet, if I'm not mistaken, and it's being broken down into 3 spaces. Right now it's 2, but you can put a wall in here and make the front one a little bit smaller. So it's like 2,200, 3,300, and maybe 3,500, 4,000 on this side. So, but in order to do so, they need the light, natural light on this wall. Otherwise, nobody's going to rent that. And right now, this big space, finding a 10,000 square feet tenant will be very difficult, especially if you don't have any frontage or any natural light on this side. So, but my question to staff is, what triggers CEQA? I mean, Sean brought this issue up as far as CEQA is required, and I wanted to know what is the legality of it. That what project? Because this project, if you look at the original or the very old building, this building has nothing to do with what was there before. And I don't know how in the world they approved in 99 or 98 to build a second story and put it on the register. After it was
Open
built.
Open question.
Yeah, after it was built, because everything else was changed on this building. I mean, we're comparing it sometimes to Masonic Temple. I mean, yeah, the windows on the temple is being replaced, but the building is there. The bones and structure and the design, everything is there.
Yeah, and the point of similarity was we were removing sections of walls to install windows.
Right.
Here we're doing it for storefronts. CEQA is triggered if there's an adverse environmental impact, in this case to the historic resource. Staff believes that the work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. By definition, work meeting the standards is exempt from CEQA in terms of cultural resource impacts. There's room to debate whether something meets the Secretary's standards, but the process that we're moving forward with is completely appropriate because if the Commission felt that it didn't meet the Secretary's standards, you would tell us that, and we would not approve the project as proposed, and we would work with it to try to find a way for that to happen. But staff strongly believes that as proposed, it meets the standards. No significant character-defining features are being lost or covered, obscured in any way. Obviously, the building is somewhat challenged in terms of its historic character to start with, but we don't think that any of this work is going to affect its status as a Glendale Register property, given that it happens to be on the register right now.
So we're not taking into consideration what it originally looked like, just what we have to work with today, and are the changes in keeping with the Secretary of Standards?
Yeah, with any historic resource, you're under no obligation to return something back to what it looked like in 1942 when Woolworths remodeled the building. In many ways, this work will bring it a little closer just by cleaning it up and, bringing the awnings back. We'll do something that gives it a little bit of that earlier character. But in general, part of your job, thinking about the Secretary's standards, is just running down the 10 standards and making a determination whether you think that this project conforms. The standards for rehabilitation are purposefully written to be rather broad, to allow buildings to go through some significant interventions while still being considered historic. And I wouldn't characterize this project as a big intervention the way other projects can be on historic resources.
And do we know when it was nominated, or when it was put on the register, what criterion it was under?
I don't know. We didn't keep our records very good at that point. Mm-hmm. So I would guess it was probably criterion A for its association with the business and the business community of Brand Boulevard. If it were for the architecture,
right, that was
could have been.
I
wouldn't have gone there, but maybe they did at the time. I don't know.
Okay.
And one thing I want to emphasize on is the flooring on the entrance that says Woolworth. That's going to stay, right?
Yes.
I took some pictures of it. It's. I think that's the main historic thing that you can relate to this building. What was there before is that flooring with the Woolworth sign on it.
Yeah, and when you look at the building, this looks like other Woolworths that you see around the country. Maybe not exactly, but a lot of them had a similar style. And so I think once a passerby sees that, you kind of have this deeper connection to the business and the history of downtown.
I have a couple questions. The signage, is there some oversight? You have a number of storefronts there. I don't know how many, with the current configuration, if it's inhabited the way you envision it, well, layout-wise, how many individual businesses?
Yeah,
Is it all?
3.
Yeah, actually.
Well, maybe they know.
Yeah,
so we
I'll
don't
explain,
have to-
because we don't know, and I think Gus is going to say he doesn't know how many
Well,
signs.
the question applies no matter what anyway. Would the signage be overseen in some way so that each individual sign would be compatible with the signage next to it?
Yeah, that's the goal of a sign program, is to bring consistency to the pattern of signs while allowing enough diversity for businesses to express themselves and their unique qualities. So there are code issues with signs. For example, the units facing Brand Boulevard are only allowed one sign. The corner unit would be allowed 2 signs. Signs are proportional to the frontage of the storefront, but in the case of a sign program, for example, if the storefront facing on the corner has a lot of frontage on Wilson, so they could have a huge sign under code in terms of square footage, but under a sign program, we might recognize that would be inappropriate to have one giant sign and then small signs, so we would, through the sign program, create consistency in the size. And then in terms of types of signs, there are various configurations you can have with pin-mounted letters, reverse channel, is it illuminated, is it not illuminated? And the goal would be to make that aspect consistent, so the sign types are the same around the building. And then we would also identify the potential locations for a sign, because when we do sign programs, again, we don't know how a building is going to be rented ultimately. So we'll identify usually the maximum number of signs and kind of place those in their likely locations, and just kind of with dotted lines, so it's not like an architectural, this is where it's going to happen. But it gives the flexibility that's needed as tenancies change.
And what about the awnings? That would be, to require consistency would be part of the deal. You couldn't remove your awnings.
Right, the awnings would be part of the design, and the commission, there is a limited amount of signage that's allowed on awnings. There's nothing proposed in these drawings, and if the commission felt it were appropriate to not have signage on the awnings, so that kind of reflected more the historic character of the Woolworth signs that were just kind of striped awnings, you could put that in as a condition, and then we would limit the signs based on the historic aspect of the design to just have signs above the storefronts.
Is the AT&T sign staying as is?
That would be a Gus Poliansky question.
Do we want to open the hearing?
Yeah, we'll open the hearing.
Yeah, I don't think it's been closed yet.
No.
Just asking questions.
As of right now, the way the lease reads, I believe that it would stay as is, although that awning can be removed.
This metal, I've been assuming that awning was going to be removed and hoping it would be removed because it's kind of a random feature there. I'm sorry, it's this metal curving canopy here. That would be kind of weird to have that hovering above the awnings and on the storefronts.
So my question would be, does the AT&T sign drive the method, style, size of all signs, or is the whole, signage package being looked at?
That's a possibility if the commission approved the AT&T sign. I believe that was there. You approved the sign for office or for the Staples that was at the corner. If you think that's an appropriate sign type, it does look like it's a little high once the awning's removed, so we might adjust that, but let them keep the sign so they wouldn't have to have a new one fabricated. That's typical of the types of signs that are sometimes approved, and could set the standard if you think it's appropriate.
What about the black finish? I have some reservations about the use of black paint or black tile, and my first initial impression when I looked at it before I got into some of the details was that the thing was moving toward an 80s look. And I was a little concerned about that, and I don't know if that's true or not. It's often very hard to look at a rendering and envision the materials and the finished look of the building and feel of the building. And we've seen situations where certain buildings have been modified that we've reviewed, and even though piece by piece, element by element, you could have said this was appropriate, in the end result, historic fabric was stripped away to the point where you could no longer see it as a historic building. And that's a difficult thing to evaluate, but I think we need to look at that very carefully and make sure with the materials and with the overall design we're not moving away from historic character.
And you can see in the historic images that there was a black base on the building, quite possibly granite, but I can't say for sure. During the 90s remodel, a new granite, kind of not the best quality base was applied. It's very much a veneer.
And there are no awnings on this?
The awnings might be rolled up in this. Well, by the 90s, the awnings were probably gone.
One?
Yeah, if you see this little hood up here, that's probably kind of a bronze sheet metal hood that the awnings would have retracted up into so that it looked clean when they were closed. I think that's this dark feature that you see along here in these other photos.
And these awnings that we're proposing aren't retractable.
No, they're fixed awnings. So the issue of the black base seems appropriate. The issue of the black paint, I've already indicated, is kind of a question mark for me. Black paint also doesn't weather very well. It tends to fade really quickly and chalk and not look so good. So it would be, staff's recommendation to avoid that. And if you have color palette ideas, we'll definitely include those as conditions, or we can just work under your direction with the applicant for the color. In terms of the material of the tile, You could condition that it be a stone material, with the caveat that veneer stone sometimes doesn't look that good, so we could make sure that it's detailed as well as possible. Staff thought the tile was appropriate because personally I've seen modern buildings that have tile work on them, and it seems appropriate to the period and to the style. And if you, like I said, if you look at the old Zinke's building, the tile that was used at the base of that seems to suit the style really well. But that was an intervention. There was never tile there. That was a new change. Here we at least know there was some kind of black base on the building. The other big difference is when you look at the Woolworth storefront, it's almost all glass. And that went away in the 90s. And so we're not, and with the structural loads from the second floor, these columns probably aren't going anywhere. So we're going to have a different type of subdivision of the storefronts from now on, as long as the building stands. So staff thought it was appropriate to do something to these rather than have them just be kind of a stucco-clad pier, to kind of integrate the base and the piers. And then with the awnings, we thought it actually would be pretty clean and sharp-looking and appropriate to the style.
Well, I just wanted to say, as far as the Wilson side, the reason it's that way, Woolworths would have run glass all the way around. The problem is that's where the lunch counter was.
I knew you were going to tell us that.
And because the lunch counter was there was no reason to put windows.
When I was a boy, I had
Yeah,
malts.
we did. When I was a boy, you would stop there, and it was a very nice lunch counter too. So, and it was 5 and dime, so you get lots of inexpensive stuff. So, I'm sure if F.W. Woolworth was still around today, that would all be wrapped in glass.
We'll get the Ouija board.
Yeah.
Unless there was a lunch counter put in.
Well, yes.
Now there's a lunch truck will come by.
Yeah, that's right.
So if there are no more questions, you should close the
Yes,
hearing.
I've closed the. That's my the public.
Well, I'll go. Well, this is a challenging project to review, I think, partly because there's so much of the original historic fabric that we lost in the late 80s or early 90s, and that's unfortunate. So I think for me it's a little challenging to figure out what's the right thing to do now. I have comments on many things, and I'll just, in no particular order, start. Well, first of all, I think what's really the most tragic is the addition of a second story on a beautiful, streamlined building, which was original. And I know we can't have the owner undo that, but that would be my first recommendation. Take off the second story. But that's just my personal opinion, not what I'm recommending today. But that element alone and the addition of windows now kind of just breaking up that beautiful kind of parapet edge that was there just makes this whole project hard to figure out what the right thing to do is. So, with that said, we'll just take element by element, which I think would be reasonable and in keeping. And as far as the removal of the corner little roof detail, I think that's the right decision to take that off. It never went with the building and shouldn't be there. So I agree with staff's recommendation on that. Regarding the lighting, yes, I think if we're going to have lighting, it should definitely be more in keeping with the style of the building. I'm not sure if the lighting was there to highlight planters or to provide light to the walking way, but I don't know that planters really fit on a building like this. If we're trying to keep that streamlined look, I think the planters should be removed. Back to the lighting. If there is lighting, I think we should seriously consider the rhythm of the lighting. Is there one on every single, vertical element? Is it every other? How are they as it relates to the openings that are going to be provided for new tenants if we don't really know the location of those yet? So I think I would leave that to staff to figure out if truly the other commissioners agreed to some lighting elements. Really, what's the rhythm of those? As far as the black, I do appreciate that the black base would be, kind of put back to match as closely as we can the original Woolworth building, although I know it was only on one elevation. So I'd recommend that be put back as close as possible to what was there,
So-
in height, in finish, in material.
Yeah, I think the height proposed on Brand is relatively close. It's definitely a lower base that you see in these photos than it is today. On Wilson, if you approve the Wilson storefronts, because of the grade change,
Yeah.
we'd either have to step them or just let them
No, I think
higher to the
I
west.
think you can go higher to lower on that side. The black paint, it's hard for me to tell in the elevation with the awnings there. Is the black paint also going currently above the windows that the awnings kind of die into?
As I understand
There's a
it,
black
the
band at the top and a black in the middle.
This black band,
Yeah.
which is one of my concerns, is shown as being painted black.
Okay. That's
You can
what's
see
painted.
here there's the drawings I don't
Got
think
it.
accurately show this. The awnings are going to fit into this little pocket
Okay.
above the windows, and I assume that pocket's going to be repeated around the corner. Oh, no, it shouldn't be. That's right, because that's where this decorative band is. So the storefronts will be lower than that.
Okay.
And-
Well, I would agree with you on the black. I think that currently with the color choices, the black banding at the top kind of sandwiches the elevation, and it doesn't allow the elevation of the building to either, wrap horizontally as it should or have the height that it would if it didn't have the dark color. So I would recommend a change into a lighter paint color on the elevation. I think those are my main comments. I'd like to hear from my other commissioners.
Okay.
Commissioner Vidor?
Okay. I still have, I'm taking the CEQA question around in my mind, trying to figure out whether we start with CEQA based on the fact that we're, again, altering a building, but then, a historic building significantly, but then again, on the other hand, we're running into the same problem of kind of the damage is done, in a way. And even though it's been done, I think we can mediate some of the previous damage by personally going ahead with making the building more usable and symmetrical in terms of frontage, glass facing, and storefront face, but that the paint job and the way the building is decorated has to be maybe taking a little bit more deference to historic colors on a streamlined, modern style building. I don't like the black. To me, it looks like an eyebrow, very strong, that middle piece there. So I would go with a different set of colors, maybe introducing, I know we're in the black and white palette here, and maybe there's a subtle historic color that's been used on buildings of this style that could be introduced that's not in the black and white palette. And,
Perhaps.
Maybe a historic colorist could give you some, I don't know. I mean,
The
where
Woolworth's
pictures
yellow.
can. I don't know. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Well,
I'm
one of the
I'm not
articles
saying
you
go
have-
go back to the hot dog stand look, but I think we definitely could introduce another subtle color. I think we have browns and grays now, so maybe there's a way to highlight the design elements and architectural features of the building without using black. I also have a bit of a problem with the what looks kind of a patent leatherish, very shiny tiles. I would like to see a flatter finish on the base. I'm not sure what material that would be, but I just am not totally comfortable with the style of tile that's been chosen, and maybe a very deep gray rather than a black might be better. I agree with Commissioner Shire about the placement of, I think we have to be careful, and I'd like to understand what the style of the lamps is going to look like and how they're going to be placed, because it could be beautiful, or it could, we don't want it to look like a lamp display. We want it to look, like lighting for the building. So that actually could make or break the building. So that's pretty.
You can also eliminate the lights.
We could eliminate the lights if we don't feel they're necessary, and maybe that's the answer. Like, this is going to be a very illuminated thing. So, what about up? Is there a place where uplighting could be added? I don't know if the building lends itself to that. They're really.
Public right-of-way doesn't lend itself.
It does not.
Yeah.
It doesn't, no. So that, and I think those were my main points. Planters, I'll just say this about planters. I think it's sad that on Brand Boulevard and other business streets down there, we can't maintain planters. You go to other towns in and around the LA area, and they're beautiful, lush-looking planters that are appropriate to the style of their building. There are certainly modern planting styles. There are modern planting styles. There are old-fashioned, prior to the 20s planting styles, and we just don't seem to be able to make greenery happen. And I just appreciate your willingness to try to have planters, but honestly, I don't see it happening on Brand Boulevard. But I wish we could do some ordinance making that would facilitate a softer environment in downtown Glendale, and we're going to miss this opportunity too, obviously. So that's about the extent of it. And CEQA is still an issue for me as to whether or not we can go ahead without a CEQA evaluation.
Just to reiterate, if you believe this project meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, then this is exempt from CEQA. CEQA is a process that's triggered when there's a material adverse impact to a historic resource. So you have to make the determination that the work proposed, and we can't take into account the 1990s work, but you have to make a determination that you think that this will impact the resource, impact its ongoing eligibility. And if you did feel that way, then you would probably vote against the proposal, and because you think it has a CEQA impact.
Okay, well, I'll just comment on that. I went line by line down the Secretary of the Interior standards, and on number 1, it was marginal, and also on number 5.
Number one, it clearly meets.
Well, I guess the problem is we have a dilemma here in that we've already broken, to some extent, the compliance with the historic intent of the building by making the additions we've already made. So it's yes and no.
Was there a CEQA report done back then?
I haven't seen it. If it was, well, the work was done by Historic Resources Group, and they did write a report that said that they felt that the work conformed to the standards.
Adding a second story.
I believe that report was issued. And
remember that too.
They were closely involved with the design also. So,
wow.
Yeah, sometimes change sometimes.
Okay, I will defer to the next set of comments. I'm done.
I think we lost this building when the addition was done in 1990s. I think the adverse impact was done to it when they added a second story, and this building, even in the current condition, doesn't look anything like what it was there before. As far as the tiles go in the base, I think you need to look at the patterns again, the one that they proposed. Just having a horizontal tile, it looks like, I think, a bathroom wall tile. The design that they had, I zoomed it in, I looked at it a little bit. I think it's something that is worth looking at, because they have a bottom and they have a top, and in the middle it's a different design. I think that would add to a character of the building. The lighting, these are downlights, right? They're not uprights.
Yeah, downlights.
Okay, I think the design of the lights has to be. We don't have anything in here. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think that would add to the character of the building and make it look prettier. The awnings, I know we're trying to make it look like the earlier awnings, but this is it's going to look like a brand new building with modern storefronts, and making the awnings just look like what it was there before by modifying the frame of it. I don't know how for the bottom of the awning to be more loose. I don't know how much of an effect it's going to have on the building. I'm not against it, but I'm saying just I think you need to look into it again, because what it was there before, it was looking at the pictures, they're much larger awnings, and they were retractable. That's why they had that the bottom of it was loose. But by changing the frame to make the bottom of the awning loose, I don't know how is it going to look like. I think that's another thing you have to look at. But I'm not against it. If you want to do it that way, that's fine. As far as the color goes, I don't know. I don't think this is even a dark black color. This rendering is not telling me much. We never made a decision on the color of the. This is black. Is this black, or my eyes are deceiving me?
Might just be dark charcoal.
It looks like dark charcoal. Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
This is a true black.
Yeah, this is dark chocolate. It's not black, but I don't know. We never made a decision on the color because a few years down the road they can change the color of the building. I think the staff can work with the applicant to see what's in that area at this time. You don't want this thing to be an eyesore because of the colors. So what's coming to that area? You can maybe take a look at it and see. Maybe have. I know.
We have bright blue and orange across the street.
I know. Let's not go there. So.
We should
I'll take that back. I'll take that back.
Perpetuate bad decision making.
Yeah, I'll take that back. So. The Superman lines, that you were talking about, when the Superman goes really fast and creates those lines were gone long time ago, unfortunately. Those are my comments. I think the color, I leave it to staff to work with the applicants if we can, because I don't have another color palette to say, okay, don't do this and do the other one. It's very difficult for me to choose on a building that I don't have an idea as to how's it going to look if I choose lighter color, gray or even another color palette. I don't have a color palette, so I can't make a decision on that.
Could we consider bringing this back? Or
that's always one of your options.
Details?
If you approve with conditions, that means staff will handle the rest. If you do return for redesign, that means it will come back to you. I would be hesitant to do a return for redesign just based on color. There's additional fees to the applicant. It's like another hearing that has to be paid for. So I would generally, the design review board reserves that when there are serious concerns about massing, scale, kind of big picture things. But it's definitely an option you have.
I don't think I want to bring it back just for the colors. I think it could be worked out with staff to make it more appropriate by changing the color on top. But again, I don't know if they bring another rendering. Just with the rendering, small rendering like this, I can't tell what. And I don't have another color palette to make a decision today. So my position would be to leave it up to staff to work with the applicant.
Well, I would like a different color palette, but since we've got what we've got right at the moment, I would have to leave it up to staff. I would like to see lighting on, depending on if they were all, like Commissioner Shire said, that they were the same for each one of the window lighting, something in a streamlined modern, because I think it just makes it more pedestrian friendly. It's just kind of inviting, and it would be nice if we could have planters. It's just walking down the street and seeing other cities that have planters. It's a very inviting thing. It just makes the place a little bit more alive. But if they can't be kept alive, then there's no use in having it itself. I do believe that they have to open up the site on Wilson, and it was nice when there was a lunch counter there. But I think it'll make the building more rentable, and it's no longer going to be Woolworths, and times change, unfortunately. So I pretty much concur with everything that's been said so far.
So if you'd like, I could go through the comments that have been, the conditions that have been made. There are a few that I think we need a little more clarification on. So I'll just run down the list. Starting with, I'll just go in order as discussed. Commissioner Shire mentioned that there are several different entry types. It does seem that it would be appropriate to, for the non-corner entries, develop a prototype entry, which could be similar, or should I guess be similar to the AT&T entry, which is slightly recessed and has slightly angled side panels. If the Commission agree with that. What we're looking for is consensus, and if we have a condition that you guys need to discuss, then we'll try to figure out which ones we move forward with. It looks like everyone was okay to remove the pyramid at the corner.
Yes.
There was some discussion about lighting, and it seems the consensus is probably toward lighting, with the caveat that we may not want to have lights on every single pier. Perhaps flanking store entries would be appropriate, or if it is on every pier, having consistent light fixtures that match the style of the building.
I think it shows on the plan that it's on every pier.
Yeah,
It
and
is currently, I don't,
so if everyone's okay with lighting on every pier, if they scale back from that, I assume everyone would be
And an
okay.
appropriate
Yes.
light, and it's all the same
Yeah, and
light.
luckily there are lots of fixtures out there that are kind of modernish that kind of are easy to find.
and we would leave that decision to staff to help
Okay.
direct them.
Right. It sounds like everyone is reluctantly okay without having the planters, assuming that the irrigation is kind of prohibitive in this setting. A question mark about the base and then I guess corresponding the columns. I heard several different things about whether it should be stone, whether it should be tile. If you agree with the staff recommendation for a larger module on the tile, Commissioner Garpetian liked the paneled detail, which I think is actually an interesting way to do it. But the actual herringbone aspect, that diagonal herringbone, was what we felt wasn't appropriate to the style. But if you wanted to have a paneled detail,
The modern style or the
this modern style. Yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah,
is consensus on that issue?
Do we have any photos that show the original in any better detail?
No, this is all applicants
Can we
submitted
take-
these.
Like as far as size and scale and grid, or
Generally, I think that the stone used tended to be big pieces of stone, probably with vertical joints that might have aligned with the joints or the mullions in the storefronts. Definitely, it's not a tile. You can tell in this that it's not a tile. So tile would be introducing something new. Historically, the safer bet would be to go with something more monolithic. The question is, would you also want that to clad the piers, which historically we didn't have piers, so you have we're just figuring out what's appropriate there. If you do go with something monolithic, what staff can do is try to make sure that the pieces are as large as possible to avoid joints as much as possible, especially on the vertical piers. You wouldn't want to see horizontal joints on those. If we go with tile, we definitely thought the subway tiles were too small just for the scale of the building and for the street. There are bigger tiles that don't look as bathroomy or as kitchen backsplashy as these do.
Sorry.
So
I would like to see the tiles or whatever material is used be softened up a little in terms of finish as well as tonality. Like it can be dark, but not black on black, more of a modulated.
Yeah, a lot of storefronts had verde marble, which is kind of a dark green and black kind of marble.
That's very
Good, so-
modern-y sounding,
Yes,
and it
yes.
sounds very nice.
So do we have consensus to avoid tile and move toward more of a monolithic finish, and we'll figure out an appropriate
Yeah.
color
good-
color
that's
tone?
But how do they look on the piers?
The goal would be that the pier merged with the base. The pier is probably going to stand proud of the base, and the base will be inset a little. So we'll have the same condition to make sure that the stone wraps. With stone, it's a little harder because you don't have curved units necessarily. But what we could do is make sure that the joints are on the jam side rather than on the face of the pier. We could also try to get mitered joints, but sometimes that doesn't work as well as you would hope.
But for this kind of a style, for a modern design, I think this tile is appropriate, but if it's in a larger scale.
And that's where staff is going. So
Yeah, I
it
think
depends
that
on where the
that would
commission
that would
comes
be
down.
more appropriate than introducing a new material that I don't know how's it going to look like with the storefronts.
So Commissioner Morgan, do you have a sense of consensus from your colleagues, tile versus stone?
Well, I like what
Whole.
Commissioner Vidor has said. I mean, we're trying to retain the building's sense of history in a very unsensed, thing. And so to keep as much or as little as we can keep, that you want to get the sense when you look at it of the kind of building it originally was. So
Commissioner Shire may be the tie-breaking, well, not quite a tie, the deciding vote.
So I'm sorry, is the consensus you'd rather have tile?
The two, I think,
trying
more
to match
monolithic
the
stone,
original?
Yeah.
closer to the original. Commissioner
I'm just
Garpetian
saying
likes the tile.
that the ultra shiny bathroom style or kitchen style tile in black, as shown on the board, I don't think is appropriate.
No. I think it should be more historic of what we can see in the photos, that if it's monolithic or large scale.
Okay, so
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
I'm sure it'll look
Okay.
good. So,
Yeah.
so we'll have monolithic stone type material.
You'll have to look closely at the detail, though, of the piers and what's that dying into.
Yeah.
Is there enough thickness at the top banding? And
Yeah,
again,
and
we don't
we'll-
have any of that.
Can it go past the storefronts, or will the storefronts, I guess, will die
Be flat.
probably into it?
Yeah.
And
So we leave all that to you, but that's a lot to
we're used to it.
work out.
I'll put a special note that, focus on the detailing. And
Yeah, because
the
that may
owners hearing
determine
that.
whether it's possible to continue that up the piers or not.
What-
We're making decisions without a lot of information,
What we do with design review board approvals with conditions is if for some reason in the field the owner either says, hey, I don't want to do that anymore, or comes to us and says it's impossible to do what the board asked, we have some latitude at staff level to make changes if we think it's consistent with the goals of your approval, and if we felt that something wasn't consistent, we would bring it back to the commission. So, okay, going back to the list, we are going to revise the paint palette for the entire building. We're going to get rid of the dark charcoal/black paint. We're going to make sure that existing historic details are allowed to remain visible under the paint, and use staff judgment to work with a lighter palette that still may work in these gray tones if that's the owner's goal, or work in other historically appropriate tones.
And that includes the awnings, too, that those would shift away from black.
Yeah, I think the awnings would, I'll make a note about that. We'll have a condition that final awning color will be compatible with new paint scheme.
correct.
Okay. Colors, lights. Commissioner Garpetian discussed the awnings and didn't feel that the loose kind of valance at the bottom of the awning was necessary. The reason I put that in as a condition is really coming from my experience working in historic districts in New York, where that was kind of a routine condition for the sense that these rigid awnings, they look kind of hard and taut in a way that old awnings didn't. So it's kind of a subtle way. They certainly don't look like the old awnings, but it gives them a little different life. So is there interest?
I would agree with that.
I would too.
To have it more flexible and
Oh,
Yeah, the
Less of a boxed
sloping part
out.
is generally pretty
Okay.
taut, but you have a little bit of movement down at the
looseness,
bottom.
yeah.
that-
Yes.
Okay, so we'll keep the staff condition for the awnings. Page 3, lights, planters. In general, everyone's okay with opening the storefronts. We didn't hear any opposition to that. Work with the detailing, and then the staff comments. I think we'll work on a sign program, and I think we've addressed all of those. When the commission votes, you can make a motion to approve the project with the conditions as read by staff. I believe the commission should also make a determination that it believes that the proposal is consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, so that we have that on the record, if you do feel that way. Ready for a vote?
I just want to, the sign that's there now, that isn't the base standard for the signs that are going to be on the other part of that.
It could be, though the location of that sign isn't ideal proportionally to the storefronts. If you had other ideas for sign types, we could talk about those.
When you say sign types, do you mean style or do you...
Yeah, there are individual pin-mounted letters. There are the kind that we don't like are just rectangular box signs that are internally illuminated. The AT&T sign comes a little closer to that than some of the other signs that we see. We have halo-lit reverse channel letters that read as solid letters during the day, and then at night they have kind of a light cast behind them that lets them read in silhouette. You have signs with plastic panels in the front. So
maybe we should use the Woolworth style.
That would be...
Yeah. The pin-mounted signs?
That wouldn't work, but that would be...
I mean, it would be nice if something that pays homage to the previous building could be used, but I don't think that's feasible with that many storefronts. So
it was one tenant. It would be a good idea, I think.
Things like that are done in some historic districts in some areas, so it's not... It may not work on Brand Boulevard, so if you're not ready to go there, that's fine, but it's not unheard of. So what we can say is we'll work with the AT&T sign. We'll try to get a more regular placement. The other signs obviously won't look like that, and then under a sign program, if and when AT&T leaves the building, the new tenant's sign will comply to the sign program.
Okay, that works.
Okay. So we're ready for a vote if there's a motion.
Do we hear a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the project with conditions.
And Secretary of the Interior standards?
Yes.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Chair Morgan?
Yes.
4-0 to approve with conditions. Did you have to depart?
Yeah, I do. I have to turn the chair over to someone else.
Do we have a volunteer to serve as chair pro tem?
I don't mind.
Sorry.
Any objections? Oh.
May I continue from here?
Yes.
Or am I waiting for Mr. Morgan to
we have
vacate?
to switch.
You have to switch? Okay, next on the agenda is item number 8, Planning Division updates and informational briefings. 8A, presentation regarding staff level design review process. Okay, here we go.
Okay, before I start going through the various points of the review and permit process, I'd like to start by sharing with you some of the resources available to Glendale homeowners and the general public to determine whether or not a property is a historic on the Glendale Register or within a historic district. The City of Glendale website, www.glendaleca.gov, has a section on historic preservation. The easiest way to get there, see if I can do this, is to go to the search option and type in historic, and it will bring you to this page. Or you can go through the path of government. Let's see where I am. Government. There'll be departments, community development department, and then And then under that, you have planning, and historic preservation is within that. There are 2 links that you can see there which show you see listing of historic properties, or you have the option of looking at the historic districts. You also have another option, which is my property historic, which allows you to type in your address that you have in question, and there's a whole search engine there that you can look at. If we go back and we go to the link of list properties on the Glendale Register, which you see here, it will take you to a master list. This master list has all of the properties that exist on the Glendale Register and within historic districts, and it lists them alphabetically. What it also does is it provides an indication of whether it's on the Glendale Register, whether it is a Mills Act property, a contributor, or a non-contributor.
Does it talk about whether it's on the California Register or National Register?
Yes. This master list doesn't. This is more focused on the Glendale designations, but I think Chris will show a slide in a second that shows that.
We also have this list as a booklet that is at the counter, so that if an applicant comes in or a planner needs quick reference, this is the easiest way to locate that property. Also online is this second list, which is in numerical order, and it shows all 109 properties that are on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources.
So to the question of, is my property historic, does it lead you to the items on that list, or is that another question that it's answering?
The Is My Property Historic link is the result of our piecemeal kind of surveying over the years.
Oh.
So it has the state historic database for Glendale, what we call CRID, which a number of years ago we tried to upgrade, and it was a complete disaster. We are planning in 2015, I feel very comfortable saying this, at this point in 2014, that we're going to have a database link that's going to be available to the public and also for staff use, that's going to have every single property that's ever been surveyed in Glendale, every designated property, as well as properties of interest to the community. For example, properties identified by the Historical Society as being of interest, but not necessarily surveyed by a professional preservation consultant, certainly not designated. But what we want to do is have a one-stop shopping opportunity for people to find out what we think might be a historic resource, or definitely is. But right now, it's unfortunately a little piecemeal, and we've been living with that for a while. It works pretty well, but not as well as it should.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruptions.
Okay. If you go back to that page on historic preservation, and now you click on the link for historic districts, this page will show you, I have the 2 arrows indicating, an actual list of all the existing historic districts, and it actually has below it the proposed historic district, and you can see Neojara Drive is there. Going into one of those districts, you'll find that there is a boundary map that shows you all the contributing and non-contributing parcels within that. And these maps exist within each description of the different historic districts. That gives you an idea of some of the resources currently available to identify Glendale Register and Historic District properties. Now we can talk about the actual process. And the important thing to say here is that both the Glendale Register properties and the Historic District properties are processed in the same way. There's no difference. It's awfully hard to read.
Yeah,
that.
we're not
Can you
allowed
see
to turn
that?
the lights off, but this screen
okay.
is usable.
Wait, can you say that again?
When we are reviewing Glendale Register properties and Historic District properties, they're reviewed in the same manner. There's no discrepancy.
Well, shouldn't
The guidelines we use are different, but the process is the same.
And we'll hit that. We'll talk about if the applicant and staff are reviewing a project and they're aware of the designation, we're going to make the assumption that there can be someone that's unaware. So we're going to say, starting with someone is aware of the designation. The planner will go through a zoning code review with that applicant, and then there'll be design review with the design studio as needed. If the applicant or the planner are unaware of the designation, they can go through that zoning code review, and they can do that preliminary review work with the planner. If there was any attempt to actually issue a permit on that, the hard hold on the property, that the Glendale Register property or the Historic District property, would stop that process from advancing without it going back for some kind of design review.
And the reason we're drawing attention to this is just to reflect the realities of the planners at the counter. They're sitting there with a steady stream of customers coming in, and in many cases, they will begin the process without checking to see if a property is historic. We have a small percentage of our properties are designated or regulated because of their historic qualities. So we don't like that. It's not ideal, and we work to avoid that. But the point is that if that happens, the hard holds catch the problem. We've had problems with that. The system is not perfect at this point, but I think we're pretty much catching everything. We haven't heard of major issues slipping through the cracks that we don't catch and resolve. So,
How does the process handle properties in pending historic districts?
We will get to
We're going to get to that. Okay, sorry.
If I may, I just
Jumping
want
the
to.
gun here.
yeah, we've mentioned hard holds before. We have a permitting database system called CSI. What does that stand for? No one ever remembers.
I know. No way.
Anyways, it's CSI. All of our designated properties, all of our known California Register properties, all of our pending properties in pending historic districts receive a hard hold. A hard hold means that no permit, no dog license, no filming permit, many things cannot be issued unless that hard hold is removed. We're really focused not on dogs or other things, but we focus on the building and safety end of this. So the idea is that no building permit's going to be issued if there's a hard hold on the property. And the way the customer service reps at building and safety deal with a hard hold is by calling up to the design studio and asking us to remove the hold. We ask what's happening. If they say there's an upgrade to the electric panel, we're okay with that. We know that's not a historic issue, and we'll remove the hold. Then they let us know when they're done. We put the hold back on. That's a point where we've had problems in the past. Holds got removed and didn't get put back on in a particularly timely manner. We have a regular cycle to put holds back on, leaving enough time realistically to let the process down in the permit center work. So there are many different kinds of holds. So hard holds aren't necessarily for historic reasons. So we call out when there is a hard hold for historic, it says historic, and then it says why. It says the property's on the Glendale Register, what number it is. It says if it has the Mills Act. It says if it's in a historic district. So
I don't have to do any more presentation.
no.
No. The design review basis. For the Glendale Register, we use the Secretary of Interior standards that apply to the entire exterior of the property. And for the historic districts, it would be the historic district guidelines, and that applies to the portion of the property that's visible from the public right-of-way. Staff approval is possible when the project meets the Secretary of Interior standards or the district guidelines, and it is below the thresholds for mandatory HPC review. And HPC review occurs when it obviously does not meet the standards or guidelines, and it's over those thresholds for review. The thresholds see here for possible staff review of Glendale Register and Historic District properties. These are basically exceptions. And we always reserve the right to kick it back to HPC, but those thresholds are for single-family residents, front additions less than 200 square feet, rear additions less than 700 square feet, multifamily residents, commercial and industrial additions less than 500 square feet, with the mandatory HPC reviewing occurring for new construction of single-family residences over thresholds, and commercial and industrial new construction or additions over the 500 square foot level. Here's where we're showing you that city services interface. We can never remember this. CSI, this is what the database that the planners use. What you can see right here, when they type in an address, here you see 3000 Spar Boulevard. The red H in parentheses indicates that there's a hard hold on that property. If they click on that address, the next screen they'll see will actually indicate that it's a hard hold and that this property is on Glendale Register. It's number 28, and that they need to contact the preservation planner or urban design studio to go further. And that was a Glendale Register property. For historic district properties, whether they're contributors or non-contributors, and also properties that are pending district designation, the same essential process happens. The hard hold is there, and it will tell you what district it is in or that it is pending a district designation.
Can I ask a question about that? So at what step in the historic district process do you go in and add holds to all those addresses?
We've been doing it after the initial historic preservation hearing, where you authorize the first petition and you say that it looks like the nomination has merit. We are going based on, we went to council recently. I think I've updated you on this, but if not, a few months ago we went to council to address the issue that came up in Brockmont Park with the Valley View project. And we don't have in our ordinance a clear path of who is the design review authority for a historic district during this kind of what we're calling the interim period between nomination and designation. And we're going to be doing community outreach with the Historical Society and homeowners groups to come up with what we think is the best solution to that. And then we're going to return to council with a staff recommendation. And if council approves that, we'll then change the code to create that process. Right now, though, by putting the holds on, we're not holding anyone to a different standard. We're just alerting our staff that, oh, we've got an issue here. It'll come to the design studio, and then we'll move forward. But the path isn't exactly clear right now in terms of the ultimate level of review.
Okay. Thank you.
And as Jay explained to you, when hard holds are lifted, they are building and safety permits, a dog license, to pay for a violation, an inspection, filming, business registration certificates, and it can also be to enter an HPC exemption. The goal is to make this process more efficient so that it would only be in the case of a building and safety permit that it would be necessary to lift that hard hold, since that would be the window when there's the most opportunity for errors to occur.
And if you're not familiar with the term HPC exemption, most of the permits, most of the design review in Glendale, for historic or not, is exempt from commission review, DRB review, city council review. These are just kind of over-the-counter staff-level permits where we meet all of the thresholds. We don't have any design issues, any issues with the standards or the design guidelines for districts. And we call that an exemption, which some people think means it's exempt from design review, which is not the case. We're definitely doing historic design review for every property, but some of those just get processed by staff. So.
Mm-hmm. And license? What license again?
Generally dog licenses.
Dog license.
The system, again, CSI isn't an ideal system as it stands.
Is a dog part
we
of the
want
house?
we want the hard holds, at least our historic hard holds, to only affect the building and safety. Once when the building inspectors are in the field inspecting a project, that's a project that's already been approved, whether it's by the commission or by staff. So we don't need to stand in the way of entering inspections, paying for inspections, all of that. So it's a difficult system right now, and we all desperately want to change it, so hopefully soon.
Just, if I may, just to clarify, the CSI system with the Consolidated Permit Center is where every permit that you might want to pull on a piece of property goes. And the hard hold is really critical because you can't enter in that you as a customer or citizen and property owner have paid the fees associated with that permit without the hold being lifted. It's the way we register people's receipts effectively. So you come in to get a dog license as an upstanding citizen and you want to pay, I don't know how much it is for a dog license these days in Glendale, but you can't release, and you live in a historic district, you can't get the license and get a receipt, and we can't register that you've paid that without lifting the hard hold. Okay. The way this becomes a particularly acute problem is on Fridays when the city is half-staffed, and oftentimes, there'll only be a few designers in this with the access with the password to lift a hard hold or the ability to do it, and they might be out on the field that particular morning so customers sometimes sit around for 2 hours waiting for somebody to come back who can authorize a hold to do something as simple as get a dog license. Now, on the other hand, we have seen cases where people want to do substantive work to a historic property and they haven't actually talked to us in advance, and so the system does work, but it does have this drawback of not exactly being the most customer-friendly process.
Is there customization to the system going on to control it by type?
We have requested that be done, but there is significant...
For years.
2015?
Yeah, significant infrastructure resources, and the Information Services Department, like other departments throughout the city, their staff is stretched very thin on a number of projects and ambitions for enhanced technology. So we're kind of in line.
Okay.
Yeah, Information Services knows this is a problem. They have a CSI committee that works on CSI issues, so hopefully in the 21st century we'll have this resolved.
If I could make one other comment, you see on the screen that Jay is the one the hold has been issued by Jay, which means that it's connected to his password. So it's not like anybody can go do it. Now, Jay has given those of us who have this, who staff the design commission or HPC, we know what his password is. So if Jay's not in, somebody else can step in and do it. But that password isn't distributed across the entire city, that anybody can just get in and do it. And we routinely have to change our passwords too as part of IS's security protocols. So,
and I'd also say that when the planners or the urban designers are aware that it is a historic property, there's a hesitation to make a decision, that has anything to do with design. People want to clear it with Jay before it happens, so.
Or with Chris or with Alan or Eileen also can clear some of them. So we're kind of trying to formulate a team, so it's not just one person who is the only path for decision making.
Mm-hmm. And just one of the other requests we made of the computer team, the IS folks, is let's not have it tied to Jay's password and name. Maybe it could be a historic planner has issued the password, so it's more wide. Doesn't seem like it's connected to a person. But right now, that's the mechanism we have.
The last thing I'll share with you, it shows, a possible flow chart of the process. you have an applicant come in to meet a planner with their project. The planner will go to that CSI, get some information regarding the zoning of the property, do their zoning review and a preliminary design review. And sometimes this is something that they can decide on their own, but typically historic property, it's going to come to the design studio for a review as needed. And when there's compliance with the requirements there, they'll receive either the HPC exempt or the approved stamp. The drawing is actually stamped and signed and dated. That goes back to the planner, who will then also stamp it with the zoning stamp and date. And it is not until those two stamps are secured that it can now move on to the building and safety for their approval. If for any reason it goes into building and safety and there are significant changes to, as required by structure or something, it could get kicked back to the design studio or to the planner. But it's not typically going to be, in this type of project, too much back and forth. And that concludes the presentation.
I have one question. So in your flow diagram that's shown, at what point are they checking with the CSI system? Because my experience has been is they may not check until the very last stop where you're paying, and now they're taking your application and they're typing things in. So you may have, or the person may have felt like they got approval on zoning, they got approval on all these different things, just to be told, oh, you've wasted your time, and oh, we might not be able to approve that. And so are they checking first stop, or can that be something to put into this process?
I think that goes back to that being aware or unaware, that you make every effort to make them aware of the fact that this is a historic property. You hope that the planner is going to jump in there first thing and check.
Are they told to do that?
But there's differences between schedule, how many people are backed up at the counter. It is a weak link in the process, and you're right. You can get all the way up to writing the check and then be told, oh, we have a hold. They call us, what is it, a second-story addition in a historic district? No. But that's an exaggeration. But for exemptions, for example, a 200-square-foot addition at the front of a property, it's rare that we're going to do that at staff level in a historic district, or certainly for a Glendale Register, but it is possible. In fact, the very first design review application we ever had, once we had historic districts, was for a very modest addition facing the street that we felt was completely exemptable, and it looks good today. But generally, if someone gets hung up that way, we have to apologize and say, we're sorry this somehow got to this point. But we're certainly not going to say, just because they're ready to write their check, that we're going to say, oh, I guess our process didn't work, so we're going to let you do this without review. We're always going to do the design review. And we can definitely make the process better. We've all know about we do staff education. We try to make the resources as plainly and clearly available as possible. The master list is now up online. It used to be just kind of a paper document we had. Now it's up on the website. And it will be on the desktop for the planners at the counter.
They have a checklist that they work to. I realize that every application is different and there's judgment calls, but is there a basic checklist of things to go through?
Well, there's citywide design guidelines which guide all projects outside of our historic districts and register properties.
Okay.
And there's not a physical checklist you go down.
Well, I wonder if a
lot of people coming to the counter are just looking for information. What's my zone? What can I do here? So it's an infinite variety of problems coming to the counter.
I wonder if on the application itself you could have a question, is your property historic? Are you in a historic district? At least that would trigger the person who's filling it out to look online or say, I don't even know what that is. I don't know if I'm in one or not.
And we do have that on our demo clearance applications. Most of the applicants or the clients coming in haven't applied yet. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of work before there's ever a paper application
we're moving toward a point where we get that application faster. We do, and this is outside of historic areas, but we have preliminary staff design review where we'll sit with an applicant for however long, however many meetings it takes to get something to the point where we can take it to the design review board, for example, hopefully with a recommendation for approval if we can get there. That's going to be limited, so we'll get to that point sooner, which could help.
But to that point, does, even at the very beginning, before the applicant has to make a formal application, are they aware that there is a formal application, and are they given an opportunity to look at it? Because even if they don't have to do anything at that point, that could be an opportunity to kind of see what's coming down the pike.
Well, I think it's a good idea to possibly have kind of a checkbox on the application to just kind of raise awareness, and that's something we can do at staff level. We don't need the council to approve our applications. So I'll bring that up with our senior staff and director and see if that's something we could change. I still don't think that's going to solve a lot of problems,
No,
but I don't see a downside to that right now.
Even just training the planners to ask those questions. Is your property historic? Are you in a district?
Yeah, and we
working on that?
we know it's not really working on it. We know that we need to address that in a better way. We've talked about having a better CSI is an incredibly cumbersome system to use, and we're hopeful that at some time it's going to be more like Zemus in Los Angeles, where Zemus has a lot of information. It is.
Yeah.
There's information that's up front that you still have to know to look for it to see if a building's historic, but it is there and it's clearly listed.
If I may, I think CSI, because it's the permit center, it's the system used, as I said, to issue permits and receipts and take in money at the permit center, is a very effective tool with the hard holds to catch work being done on properties that might have a historic impact, but people may not necessarily think that. Like, for example, I'm thinking of like re-roofing a house and sort of taking off Spanish tile roof with maybe, the sort of two-piece tile roof, and somebody wants to replace it with S-tile, which in many cases, many common sense people think that there's not that big of a difference, but we know from a historic standpoint, that's a big difference. And a roofing contractor might be the one trying to pull that permit. That's the kind of stuff that CSI is very effective at catching. If somebody wants to actually put an addition onto their house, if they're in a register, or in many cases if they're in a historic district, they're very aware of that, and they know that Glendale has a very robust design review process, and they're inclined, in many cases, I think, to just already come in and make appointments in advance. So they're making a pre-application appointment. They may be told you're in a historic district, but they may already well know that. And then that sort of triggers all of a sudden, we know we're in a historic district. So I don't think people wanting to do additions onto their houses of any significant size is something that CSI is the tool to catch. The process we have with our design review and making pre-appointments with planners tends to catch that pretty effectively. We don't tend to go very far, I think, on talking to applicants without it being raised that this is a potential historic issue, because the three people doing most of the design review meetings in the city are sitting in this room, and work on preservation-related issues at the same time. So,
plus, if they want to make an addition, I think they hire an architect, and most architects who work in Glendale, they are aware of the historic districts and what's going on. We had one case, I don't know, a couple of months ago. It was in Spar Heights. There was an architect from West Side, and I don't know if you were in the room or not, and that was kind of awkward, but it was
an interesting hearing.
Yeah, it was an interesting hearing. But most of the architects, they know about historic districts and what's going on. So.
Yeah, the important thing here, I think, is recognizing the liabilities of the system and also recognizing the practical realities of just what life is like in the permit center and at the counter. The holds become that much more important because, and our system since just in the last year, we've improved the system significantly in terms of making sure the holds get back on. We've gone back through all of our holds to make sure that there aren't any that we're missing, and we'll have to do that periodically. In terms of awareness, we have the brochure that I've been mentioning for a while now, pretty much ready to go. Hopefully, January, February, that's going to be mailed out. So every property owner and resident in the historic districts is going to get this on a yearly basis. Whether that it'll work for some, it won't work for everyone, and we still will be dealing with the legal work forever. So.
Now, talk a little bit more about the hold being put back on. Is that now automated? If it was taken off for, say, a 10-day period or a reasonable amount of period, is that automatic or that's still?
It's unfortunate.
But we're doing it on a weekly basis now.
Okay.
So.
And if possible, away from your desk to go to address on a list so that you come back. Just wait. That person calls.
No.
Or you just wait for the person at the desk to call you so that you can put that hard hold right back on.
Yeah, there are times when a hold has to stay off for a couple of days. You take the hold off one day because the applicant is coming back with a check the next day. The CSRs who do this, they've gotten pretty well trained to kind of let us know when it's off, and then we do keep a digital list of every hold that comes off, and then we go through that on a weekly basis and just put those holds back on no matter what. Even if someone was hoping to keep it open, they'll just have to call us again and take it off again.
One other thing they can do is that most of the companies do is if that hold is removed, then you automatically will get an email about the hold being removed. And
not CSI.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask the same thing. Is there even a report that can be run of properties that are historic or in districts with a hold off so that it can tell you more proactively on a weekly basis? Or is that another customization for IT?
It would be IT, but it seems possible. Database, you should be able to run that report.
You have the information there. It seems like it would be helpful.
Yeah, we've never done it.
The one caveat to it is that even though that hard hold might be removed, the hard hold indication remains there. The H in red parentheses next to the property stays there. So
the report doesn't reflect the removal of a hard hold.
it does. If you go into the
other
hard
fields,
holds, it does tell you that it's been released for a reason, but that doesn't mean they're just going to, willy-nilly just go and process, anything that anyone comes into, because they do have that designation.
Yeah, the H still is there. That's another issue we resolved. We began taking holds off in a different way based on some advice we got. We realized that was making the H go away, and that's where we had a problem that actually was brought to the commission. So as soon as we realized that was happening, we went back to the system that was a little more cumbersome, but it's safer. So,
any other questions? Thank you. That was very, very thorough. Good information.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, that's the last item on our agenda. Do you have anything else, Jay?
No. Happy holidays.
Yeah, I just want to...
Next first meeting of the new year, we're going to do our year-end wrap-up for 2014. We're going to look at all the Mills Act conditions and what was fulfilled and what wasn't, and let you know where that stands.
And other properties added?
We'll go through the properties added. We'll talk about where our districts are. We'll give you a full kind of update. So.
Yeah, I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and Happy Holidays.
You too.
And you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.